How do you feel about your body? If you're pregnant, are you enjoying the expansion and the new fullness? If you're postpartum, how do you feel with some of the new curves, fullness, and maybe if you're like me, those stretch marks that appeared out of nowhere, right? Do you love your body? If you struggle to say you love your body, just yesterday we spoke about pregnancy, birthing, and postpartum bodies in my Orgasmic Birth Practitioner program. It's a program for doulas, midwives, nurses, pelvic floor therapists, and all providers who want to expand their practice with pleasure and connecting childbirth and parenting to all our life, sensuous, sexual, and sacred. And we all acknowledges the challenges that we had and that so many people have in being more critical rather than loving our changing bodies. My guest today is here to provide you with insights to loving your potent birthing body. Hi, I'm Debra Pascali Bonaro, founder and director of Orgasmic Birth and host of the Orgasmic Birth podcast. My guest today is Christine Mason. She's the founder of a leading plant-based sexual wellness company, Rosebud Woman. Have to just say, I love all her products. She's also a mom of 4 bio kids, a grandmother, a tantric sexual wellness advocate, author of 8 books, and host of the Rose Woman podcast with a deep interest in love, liberation, and living in the vibration of essential joy. I had the great honor of meeting her about a year and a half ago at an amazing gathering in Congress that she put together. So, Christine, I am so honored to have you join us today.
Thank you. I loved, by the way, your talk at that event. That was Sensing Woman. And when you talked about orgasmic birth, you brought such big energy and joy and pleasure into the conversation that it's my honor to come and chat with you. So, yeah.
So, yeah, it was a great connection, right? And that's why I'm glad you're here today. And I always like to ask everyone to start, if you have a birth story, and I think you have at least one, to share a little bit about what birth was like for you.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, I have 4 bio kids, so the births were all very different. And I think that's common to a lot of women. Each one has its unique flavor. But I was very young. I was 18 when I got pregnant, and I didn't have a living mother. I didn't have a maternal line, so there was no I had no transmission of knowledge. So when it was time to go and have my son, I was in a hospital situation. It was a 36-hour labor. It was a forceps extraction. The nurses bullied me for being a teen mom. It was like a pretty traumatic experience. And then the next one, my daughter, was super easy. It was also a hospital birth. The next one was almost a 11-pound baby who arrived in 2 hours. So, very different.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were like 3 and 3 years, Deborah. So when I finally I was coming of age, and I had just at that point started diving into a more holistic sense of, what was my body? How was I related to my body? How did spirit fill my body? I began, more conscious eating and more earth-based traditions. And by the time I had my last child, who is, I guess it was 6 years later, we decided to do a home birth. And I want to just, before I tell that story, that the experience of that home birth was the first time I felt the potent power of actually dropping into the life-giving force of being in a female body. I did not feel it in the hospital births, which were either partially medicated or just fast and noisy and distracting. So that birth was with Chicago midwives, and they were really fighting the good fight, bringing the midwifery community alive. And if you remember in the 90s, like there was a lot of fighting against midwifery even being a thing, as if you were, somehow threatening a woman's life rather than returning her to what is a natural process. And it was a very beautiful full day labor. I sang the blues in transition in the shower. He was birthed in the bathroom. There's a lot of more release in the body when it's done in the bathroom. And then I can remember kind of squatting in that goddess position, goddess pose in yoga, like your sort of feet are turned out and you're squatting halfway and your hands are up and you're grabbing something and just like roaring, and the baby coming out and feeling like, oh, I had it was truly like a moment of being very close to divinity. And then we didn't name him for 7 days. And, it was a beautiful, sweet postpartum period where we sort of got to know this child. And, it was really lovely. So I've had a lot of different experiences in a nutshell.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I think for so many people, we hear that journey, right? That sometimes it takes different birth experiences to bring you to the place and the way that you can fully step into your body, your birth. And that's why I'm so glad you're telling this story to help people that are listening. Stories are so powerful. And you acknowledge you didn't have that, that maternal input and lineage. So hopefully your story and the stories we tell here are helping people to have that and reconnect the first time, right? To step into that space.
Yeah, and I would say in retrospect, that first birth, like the one that was the big baby and the last baby, were both 42-week pregnancies. And in the first
Wow.
birth, it was they induced me at 40 weeks. So that's why that labor, I feel, is like a Pitocin induction at 40 weeks. And I feel that's why that labor was 36 hours. My babies just weren't baked that early. So also to sort of allow the spaciousness for the body to know when it's time to birth. That was another learning from that process. Yeah.
Re-
Yeah.
Really interesting that they were all 42 weeks, right? It does seem like sometimes people have that different gestational phase. So wonderful that you were able to trust that in other pregnancies.
Yeah. Once they're out forever. There's no hurry.
I like that. That's right, right? A
Yeah.
lifetime of mothering and
Yeah.
parenting.
And
So,
that is true. That is true. A life like my oldest is turning 40. And it's a really amazing thing. Like you enter into this journey that I mean, that's such a cliche, right? But it goes through these phases. And there's a period sort of around their 20s when they're all individuating, and then they come back. And this beautiful new friendship has emerged, both between them and between me and them. It's right relationship between adult child and adult and parent. And it's beyond delightful. Yeah. Mm,
so
mm.
special, right? We're always changing and learning and growing. Well, that brings me to, did your births and that experience have any impact on all that you're doing today? Like what brought you to what you're offering now?
Yeah, I would say there's a common like I'm a pretty, I'm educated, I'm at a privileged class in society, and yet I had all of these traumatic experiences in my life, and every point of suffering in my life came from being in a female body. Like my mother was murdered in a violent crime for being a woman
Oh,
and targeted for that. I
so
had early
sorry.
sort of totally lack of any knowledge around like periods or my sexuality. And so there was a lot of slut shaming and shaming and not knowing what to do with that desire. There were, an early pregnancy experience. There was, just being disadvantaged at work because of my gender and my parenting status. There were things later on that were related to confusions around, like I had a uterine prolapse at one point and ended up having surgery and didn't really even understand my body. And as I got into the sort of more analytical frame around why is God a man in the traditions I was in? Where did I get all these ideas around my body? And why don't I know the science about my body? All of that sort of informed this like, I really want to feel good. I don't want to be an object. I don't want to be like starving myself to fit a model. So it wasn't just the birth experience or the lack of maternal connection on the birthing. It was the sense of like, what could it mean to be whole and complete in a female body at this time in history? And are the things that I'm being steeped in and told my value comes from things that I actually believe? And so by the time I started making product, I had already been doing yoga, I'd been doing meditation, been trying to heal my own sexual wounds, been trying working with trauma. Understand, my husband had had a very big bout with cancer, and during that time, we really dove into eating clean, organic, non-toxic. So by the time I hit perimenopause, and I was sort of like, I want something to reduce friction and feel better in my vulva and vaginal region, I was very conscious about the ingredients and the content that was going on my face, in my mouth, on my body, and I couldn't find anything that I wanted. So the initial impetus was to make products that were whole and complete and would honor the body and would remove the care of the body from like a pharmacy or a pathologized situation and return it to like body care and self-love. And then as I was researching and launching, I sort of started to put the pieces together of how deeply this mission of restoring the right relationship to yourself in a body was part of all of these other prior experiences that had happened. And the larger mission, more joy, less suffering, love and liberation in a female body, came out of that. So sometimes you don't know why you're doing it. It only becomes evident in retrospect. And that's what happened here.
Yeah, so many experiences you just shared that just so, touched me and what your journey has been and how you used in some way the pain of that to really find a purpose. And boy, are you really bringing such good products and information out to so many. And so I'd love for you to talk to all our listeners that are pregnant, postpartum, parenting. We do have this issue around the body. A lot of people, I'm sure, just really resonated with how you said, for all different reasons, not really celebrating and finding the joy and pleasure in a female body. What were some of the tips that you can share with them to really get that body potency to, as I say, love their body?
Yeah, I would say that that even predates pregnancy. Like first of all, if you didn't have someone as when you were young, like as you were a child growing up, and allowing you to be a firm yes and a firm no, in like your body belongs to you, then I would say start with that. Like your body isn't for someone else's pleasure, for it's not an ornament. Although, a lot of women do get power during a certain stage in their lives by being super attractive, hot girl syndrome or whatever. But that is a very short term and shallow situation. So coming into relationship with who you are and and then developing that sort of inner radiance, like the unconditional love of your opportunity to live in a body is an inside job. So I feel like there's a kind of a speaking to um, the essence, like to almost hypnotize your own self back to you being your own mother and imagining your own self being born. No mother ever looked at her baby and thought almost anything other than what a miracle, how perfect. And that's you, mama. You were that also. And you're no less that today than you were on the day that you were born. And that these processes of living in a body each have their own stage and magic. And so if you have been objectified by the culture, it's very likely that that little voice is living in your head and you're self objectifying today. So the first step I would say is like to get out of the external gaze on yourself and to go from the internal feeling. Like, what's it like to live inside of your body? So that's the first thing. The
Yeah.
second thing is like, maybe I could pause there just for a minute because, that's a big thing. We could probably spend a whole hour on talking about just those techniques on how to return to unconditional love, any places of judgment and shame, and let the light come in there. That's a really deep practice. Let me pause.
It is, but keep going because I'm loving this. So, what would you say next?
I would say then restore your relationship to looking. Like, what do you consider beautiful, and how is what you consider beautiful informed by the culture? And then get a much more expansive view of that by looking at all forms of beauty across all cultures at all times in history, and see what you think is beautiful. Like, who are you drawn to in the world, really? And do you objectify them as much as you objectify yourself? Are you as hard on them as you are on yourself? Like a little bit of cognitive stuff and then restoring touch to your own body. So I eventually, after we did the first intimate care product, I started doing body care, and I made this oil, this anointing oil. And anointing is, a very honoring and reverent practice, but with it, in the book is like every day, just try this for 6 weeks. Start at your feet, and I love you feet, I love you shins. Apply the oil and do this whole affirming process, and really look at like your skin and the way your joints are constructed, and just spend like 10 minutes a day loving and touching yourself and noticing, and come into like not an avoidant relationship or a critical relationship, but just an appreciative lens on it. And then like think about all the things that it's done. I'm like, oh my God, my feet have carried me for like going on 60 years now. This is insane. You know, so there's a process of reconnecting physically. And as you touch yourself, you're also generating oxytocin. So you get, I'm touching myself right now, which is a little weird on video, like joking yourself. Touch your whole body. Touch your intimate areas, and return to a sense of actually petting and loving yourself, and seeing your own being. Now, the sort of mother movement, like the matrescence, because the act of the stage of turning into a mother is a much it's transformational in identity, and it's transformational in focus. And it's not always easy. We talk a lot about like there's, whether it's postpartum depression or beginning to feel invisible, or the legacy of the dishonoring of like the housewife or the mom, that all sits with us. Like you're supposed to be a mom and be in everything else in the culture, but honoring that, the vitality, like you're literally making the future. If you are able to be present with your child in this deep way, that they felt met emotionally, that they feel nurtured, creating and raising a child who can be loved, and who can like know their own mind, and be like a sovereign agent, a deep being, is the most important work that one can do on the planet. And to elevate yourself in that way, even if you're doing other things, like this is the most important work I can be doing, also sort of takes your attention off of the external gaze. Like, am I, do I still have a 26-inch waist? If you ever did, I mean, that's me already,
Right.
like,
Really.
spinning into my, what the culture equates, because I don't believe that to be like a beauty standard. So, so that piece about like honoring and elevating your role. And then, let me see, there's another piece in here. Just pause for a second. No. Let's say, inside general. There's a piece I want to call out around the inner. It's again kind of on the inner radiance, outer expression. Like I have a bunch of stretch marks on my hips, and I don't think that they're very objectively pretty. And so I started to kind of reframe them and go like, oh, these are like my sergeant stripes for having each baby. Like to start to honor them as like tattoos in a way, like they mark my body tells my life story, and that's
Yes.
exciting. Like there's a poem where I don't want to like I don't want to end my life in a perfect body. I want to slide into home base, muddy and dirty, with a champagne glass in one hand and my face stained in strawberries, like it's just, that's where we're all going. Like you might as well enjoy it along the way. Same with your breasts, how they move and sink and expand, and the nipples change. Just, it's just part of being alive. It's such a privilege to be in a body. So kind of shifting that, I guess.
I love
Yeah,
it.
I'm gonna pause.
That is so beautiful. So beautiful. Now I'm going to take it to some other things because those postpartum
Yeah.
bodies and your products are good for these too. Like we have vaginas and labias and perineums that are
Yeah,
healing after birth.
yeah, yeah,
So can you give us, because you gave us so many practical things on loving this body, how can we
yeah.
have some tips on healing that for those people that are preparing for postpartum?
Well, I'll take it in two parts. The first is the actual skin of the labia, the vulva, the perineum, and then the muscular, the pelvic bowl, the pelvic basin as a whole. So, if you begin about 6 weeks prior to birth doing perineal massage, which is like taking the thumb and putting it inside the introitus and then massaging, we have a product that's great for that, the Honor Balm, massaging that and stretching that area, you can really reduce the likelihood of an episiotomy or a tear. And it creates more flexibility in the skin and kind of trains it to open. So before, and then also the body oil on the belly to help with the itching that can come with stretch marks and possibly like stretch marks are kind of genetic, but they do itch. They kind of create as your skin expands. So that can help with that and also reduce scarring. And then afterward, that you and all of the birth practitioners out there have so many tips on how to like reduce swelling, and when it heals, to start using balms to restore the skin, to use cooling products to help with the burning. There's a lot of things like that, but definitely perineal massage pre and post as soon as any stitches have healed. Definitely using gentle cleansers, no soaps, nothing like that on that part of the body. Yeah, there's that. And then the inner and outer labia often change during, they'll hang differently, and they're sort of expect that, like that's going to happen. Another thing that sometimes happens is all the blood flow that comes into the vulva enlarges the clitoris for a really long time. So you can be super sensitive after birth, and it's kind of an uncanny feeling because you're like in pain, but you're also slightly aroused, which is strange. Okay. It's a strange experience. Some things that people don't talk about is that when you're nursing, the nursing creates contractions in the uterus, and it brings the uterus back into shape. But nursing can also have a sexual arousal component. And people are like, why am I getting sexually aroused when I'm nursing? This is so strange. And there's like a shame that comes with it. But like understand how these systems are all intertwined. I've got a couple articles on the site that I'll send you on nipple stimulation or arousal during breastfeeding and why that's not a problem and how to roll with that. So aftercare, definitely with product, but I would say the whole pelvic basin, like think of it as this bowl. If you're on video, I'm holding my hands up in like an expanded, if you're on audio, I'm holding my hands up in kind of an expanded basket shape. And that you have in yoga practice, if you've done any yoga practice, they sometimes tell you mula bandha, which is to pull the perineum up toward the tip of the tailbone, like you're putting a little cap on the tailbone. But in women, that mula bandha is also bringing the walls of the vagina together, front to back and side to side. So you're like pulling the front of the body toward the whole tailbone or the sacrum in, and then both of the hips come in, which kind of creates an elevation in the sides. Tuck the tailbone slightly and then pull up. And like it's different than a Kegel, because a Kegel is like controlling the urinary flow, but this is a different muscle group. So I would say either go online or work with a pelvic floor therapist and begin that as soon as possible after birth and even before birth, like to strengthen and create containment there. Because the one thing that I really disliked was urinary leaking. Incontinence after birth is a really super big pain, and you can train the body to at least eliminate that discomfort. Otherwise you end up going in for like you're either wearing pads all the time or you're going in for like a little sling installation where they sling the bladder up, and that doesn't sound fun at all to me. So those are some things, pelvic basin exercises. And then let's see, I guess another thing to discuss in postpartum is like, when are you going to get back to having sex? And to really understand the recovery period is different for everyone. And if you've had an episiotomy, if you've had a tear, if you've had trauma in the vaginal canal in any way that's like beyond sort of normal wear and tear from birth, that it might take you a while. And you might need extra lubrication, extra moisturizer. You might be so tired you're not interested at all. And to find the space and time for your own personal rest, your personal nourishment, encourage your partner, if you have one, to give you non-sexual touch, increase the length of foreplay. That's really vital in this stage, because the blood flow and the foreplay will really help ease those early experiences coming back. And do not believe the nursing you can't get pregnant myth. That's all I'm telling you. That's a message from my past self to you in this current moment. Like, you can't get pregnant when you're nursing. Actually,
yes.
Anyway, do you have any? Where would you like me to go from here?
Yeah,
Obviously,
no,
the topic
that
of great choices
It is a topic of great joy, and I love it. You've given us so many tips. So I want to just leave it to you. Do you have one last thing you'd like to share with people that are listening and might be pregnant or postpartum or considering it?
I I would like to I want to do a little like zoom out for a minute, which is there's no right thing to do with pregnancy, postpartum. It all throughout history, 1 in 5 women have entered their childbearing years, ended, excuse me, let me replace that. All throughout history, women have ended their childbearing years without having a child. Whether you, and now it's like 1 in 3 in Tokyo and 1 in 4 in the West. So there's a movement in general to say like having a child is not the only way to advance culture. Like we can advance life by actually bearing it and make the future that way, or we can do it through our creativity or our intellect, so that there's not like a, a right or a wrong in whether a woman decides to have a child. And that there's a lot of complexity in the decision to go ahead with a pregnancy at this time, economically. And I'm noticing that the age of first pregnancy is now close to 30 years old in the United States. There's a vast shift going on, and to be really in a dialogue about how you want to create the experience of motherhood now, because you sometimes when you're in it yourself, you don't even know that you're part of a sea change that's going on in the culture. Lean in and have original dialogues. Don't replicate what your parents did. Don't try to do it alone. Really lean in and find moms groups and parenting co-ops, and create community around the experience of raising babies, because it is all changing. And then the other thing that I think is a huge thing is I cannot understate the impact of religion on the understanding of the value of being in a female body. That when we went to a dominant patriarchal religion and away from the goddess traditions or the traditions that were more even, like Ardhanishwara, the half and half god, where everybody is half their mother and half their father, strength and receptivity. And that the going back into like, there's a reason that the potency of female reproduction, the ability to create life, is a threat. You know, to want to regulate and take control and have power over human reproduction is a 1,000 year plus journey now, 2,000 year journey. And I feel it being restored around the world. And the first place, the journey to re-seeing yourself as a representation of divine creativity is to do it inside and to hold yourself like a queen through this whole process. You are a bearing queen creating life, and to honor that as deeply as you can in yourself and others. Allow yourself to receive care, allow yourself rest as much as you can, and enter into this process with great honor, reverence, and dignity.
What beautiful words to really bring us to a close. I can't thank you enough, Christine. And I'd love for you to share with everyone how they can find you, follow
Uh,
you, about your products.
yeah. My daughter is now president of Rosebud Woman, and you can find she is doing an amazing job. She's also a mom, and she has also a very her birth stories are different. So that company, which is intimate care and reverent body care, all plant based, as I said, is at rosewoman.com. We also added a line of amazing candles this year, which are all about creating ritual. And then my personal site is XTeenM, XTINE, like Christine is like Christmas is Xmas, Christine is Xteen, xteenm.com. And I'm the.rose.woman on Instagram, and the podcast. That's where I do the podcast and all of that. And we talk about a lot of things around trauma and liberation and finding the path of joy, and also some things on sexuality. Although more and more I'm feeling like it's an inside job. So we're talking more about the development of the inner life. So yeah, come find me. I love having conversations on this topic all the time. And there are over 800 articles at rosewoman.com on all aspects of uh, birth and pregnancy and sexuality and menopause, perimenopause, and cancers in women and healthcare and advances in technology that can help you. So, come use our resources. That's one of the main reasons we exist.
Thank you so much, Christine. All of that's in the show notes. For those of you that are listening, definitely look below wherever you're enjoying our podcast. And I want to thank you again, Christine. And thank you to all our listeners for joining us. And we hope you'll comment, tag us on social. We love to hear your favorite takeaways. And we hope you'll join us next week for another episode of the Orgasmic Birth Podcast. Thank
Thank you,
you.
lovelies. Bye.